It began in a place meant for learning, a high school where young minds were supposed to be shaped, futures built, and trust upheld. But in 1990, the halls of Winnicott High School became the backdrop for a scandal that would grip the nation and leave a lasting scar on its small New Hampshire community. Behind closed doors, one teacher, a respected mentor, a guide, crossed a boundary that shattered lives. Her name was Pamela Smart, and what followed was a sequence of choices and events so shocking that even seasoned investigators struggled to comprehend its full scope. There was a murder, yes, but before the blood was spilled, before the courtroom cameras captured every tear, every testimony, there was something else. A relationship that should have never been. A story of power, obsession, and betrayal. What drives a person to manipulate, to push boundaries so far that the lines between love and control blur beyond recognition? And how does an affair between a teacher and her students culminate in a killing that shocked the nation? This is the case of Pamela Smart, a story where every answer brings a new question and where the truth remains as elusive as the innocence lost. Stay with us, because what you're about to hear will leave you questioning everything. In 1990, the town of Derry, New Hampshire was the kind of place where life moved predictably, where the biggest excitement was the high school football game on a Friday night, and everyone seemed to know each other's business. But this sense of calm and familiarity would soon be shattered by a crime so shocking that it would leave even the most seasoned investigators speechless. At the heart of the storm was Pamela Smart, a 22-year-old media coordinator at Winnicott High School. Ambitious and outgoing, Pamela had recently married her high school sweetheart, Greg Smart. By all appearances, they were a perfect young couple with a promising future. Greg, 24 years old, was steady, reliable, and deeply in love. Pamela, bright and charismatic, seemed to have everything she wanted, or so it seemed. But things were not as they appeared. In her new role at the high school, Pamela caught the attention of a 15-year-old student named Billy Flynn. Quiet, shy, and unassuming, Billy was the kind of boy who stayed in the background, unnoticed by most. Yet, to Pamela, he was different. And to Billy, Pamela wasn't just a teacher. She was everything he thought he needed. What began as friendly mentoring sessions after school quickly turned into something no one could have anticipated. Pamela began confiding in Billy, sharing her frustrations about her marriage, her life, her dreams that seemed to be slipping away. For Billy, those moments of closeness were intoxicating. He admired her. He wanted to protect her. And soon, he fell in love with her. But love wasn't the only force at play. What unfolded between them crossed every boundary of trust and morality. Lines were blurred, then erased entirely, and before long their relationship set off a chain of events that would leave one man dead, a teacher sentenced to decades in prison, and a teacher condemned by a jury and by the nation. This is the story of Pamela Smart, a case that began in the quiet corridors of a high school and ended in one of the most publicized murder trials of the decade. But who was really pulling the strings? Was it Pamela, the teacher with a thirst for something more? Or Billy, the teenager who claimed he was coerced into murder? Stay with us, because as we unravel this story, every answer will lead to a dozen new questions. And by the end, you'll be left wondering, where does guilt begin, and where does innocence end? If you're captivated by unraveling the truth behind real-life mysteries, make sure to subscribe to our channel, and let us know in the comments, was Pamela Smart a calculating mastermind, or was she unfairly blamed for a crime she didn't commit? To understand what happened in the spring of 1990, we must first understand the people at the heart of this story. Pamela Smart was 22 years old, a recent college graduate with an unmistakable confidence and a radiant personality. Born and raised in Windham, New Hampshire, Pamela had always been ambitious. She earned a communications degree and had dreams of becoming a TV broadcaster. Her natural charisma and energy made her well-liked, and she seemed destined for success. In her personal life, Pamela had what many would envy, a young, loving husband, Greg Smart. The two had married less than a year earlier in a ceremony full of promise and hope. Greg, 24 years old, was steady and dependable, the kind of man who grounded Pamela's more adventurous spirit. He worked in insurance and adored his wife. Their shared love for music and dreams of building a life together gave them an image of young, newlywed bliss. But like so many stories, the reality was more complicated. Beneath the surface, Pamela's restlessness grew. She wanted more excitement, more passion, more of the life she felt she deserved. Greg, ever practical, wasn't always able to fulfill those unspoken desires. And Pamela, though outwardly content, began to feel trapped in the very life she had chosen. And then there was Billy Flynn. At just 15 years old, Billy was still navigating the awkward and uncertain terrain of adolescence. A student at Winnicott High School, Billy was quiet and shy, the kind of teenager who often went unnoticed. But like many boys his age, he was impressionable and eager to be seen as something more. When Billy met Pamela, it was as if a spotlight had been turned on him. Pamela was everything he admired, confident, worldly, and magnetic. She spoke to him with a warmth and attention he wasn't used to, and he quickly found himself drawn to her. For Billy, Pamela was more than a teacher. She was a figure of admiration and allure. What neither of them could have anticipated was how quickly their connection would deepen. It began with small moments after school, conversations, shared jokes, glimpses into Pamela's life outside the classroom. To Billy, it felt like he was being invited into a world far beyond the one he knew. But it wasn't just admiration that pulled Billy closer. Pamela confided in him, sharing stories of her unhappy marriage, her frustrations, and her longing for something different. For a 15-year-old boy, this was intoxicating, being trusted by someone he admired so deeply, being told that he was special, important, even necessary. What started as innocent exchanges soon evolved into a relationship that crossed every boundary. Billy became more than a student in Pamela's eyes, and Pamela became far more than a teacher in Billy's. Their bond, born in the quiet corridors of Winnicott High School, would set the stage for a tragedy no one could have foreseen. Pamela Smart and Billy Flynn, two lives separated by age, experience, and expectations, but drawn together by something that would soon spiral far beyond their control. What followed was a series of decisions that would bind them together in ways they could never escape. And at the center of it all was a man who had no idea his life was about to end. The lines between teacher and student are meant to be clear, unshakable. But for Pamela Smart and Billy Flynn, those lines were blurred, then crossed entirely. It began innocently, or so it seemed. Pamela had taken an interest in Billy during a media project at Winnicott High School. She saw him as someone quiet, with potential that hadn't yet been realized. She encouraged him, praised his work, and made him feel noticed in a way no one else had before. For Billy, a shy teenager navigating the uncertainties of adolescence, her attention was like a spotlight. But soon, Pamela's encouragement became something more. She began to share glimpses of her personal life, details that no teacher should reveal to a student. She spoke of her struggles, her frustrations, her unhappiness in her marriage to Greg. She described her life as trapped, her marriage as cold and distant. To Billy, it sounded as though Pamela was confiding in him, trusting him with secrets she shared with no one else. And Billy listened. He listened intently, soaking up every word, every gesture, every glance that Pamela offered him. For him, it was more than attention. It was validation, intimacy, something far deeper than he had ever experienced. The after-school conversations grew longer, more personal. What began as professional mentorship turned into private meetings. Pamela began to open her world to Billy, sharing not just her frustrations but also her dreams, her desires, and her longing for an escape from the life she claimed was suffocating her. It wasn't long before their connection crossed into physical intimacy. At first it was subtle, an accidental touch, a lingering look. But soon, there was no pretense of boundaries. Pamela and Billy began a full-fledged affair, meeting in secret, stealing moments together where no one could see. For Billy, it felt like love, raw, overwhelming, and all-encompassing. For Pamela, it seemed to be something else entirely. But this wasn't a simple love story. Pamela had something else in mind. She wasn't just sharing her frustrations with Billy, she was planting ideas that would take root in the mind of an impressionable teenager. She told him that Greg was the reason she couldn't be happy, the reason they couldn't be together. She painted Greg as the obstacle standing in their way, a man who didn't understand her, didn't support her, didn't love her the way she deserved to be loved. And then she planted the seed of a solution. If only Greg weren't in the picture, she said, we could finally be together. Billy, blinded by his feelings for Pamela, began to believe her. He believed her when she said she was a victim, when she told him that Greg didn't care for her, when she hinted that their love could only survive if Greg were gone. And he believed her when she said there was only one way to make that happen. They first looked at the man in Polly's car, at the old car down the street, a party of zippered girls in the first. In Pamela's hands, Billy wasn't just a teenager in love, he was a pawn, a means to an end. And as the days turned into weeks, her words began to shape Billy's thoughts, his actions, his destiny. What he didn't realize was that the path she was leading him down was one he could never return from. The plan was as simple as it was horrifying, at least that's how Pamela Smart made it seem to Billy Flynn and his friends. She had laid out her case to Billy with careful precision, telling him that Greg's death wasn't just necessary, it was the only way their love could survive. But Billy couldn't do it alone. Pamela knew that, so she encouraged him to enlist the help of his closest friends, Patrick Randall and Vance Latimer Jr., two teenagers who, like Billy, were impressionable and eager to prove themselves. Together, the three boys began to piece together a plan that would forever alter the course of their lives. It was decided that Greg Smart would be killed in his own home. The boys would stage the scene to look like a robbery gone wrong, ensuring that no suspicion would fall on Pamela. On May 6, 1890, they put their plan into motion. Billy Flynn and Patrick Randall would be the ones to enter the condo. Armed with a .38 caliber revolver borrowed from Vance Latimer Jr.'s father, they approached the door with a chilling determination. Meanwhile, Vance waited in the getaway car, ready to speed them away once the job was done. Pamela, careful to create an alibi, attended a school event, ensuring she was far from the scene when everything unfolded. As the door swung open, Greg Smart had no idea what awaited him. Patrick Randall grabbed him, forcing him to kneel on the floor. Greg begged for his life, but the boys were already too far gone to turn back. With shaking hands, Billy Flynn raised the gun and pulled the trigger. The single shot echoed through the condo. Greg Smart's life was ended in an instant, his final moments marked by fear and betrayal. The boys hurriedly ransacked the apartment, scattering items to make it look like a burglary. Then they fled into the night, leaving behind a scene that would soon become the center of a murder investigation. But the perfect crime they envisioned was anything but. Even in the chaos, they had left behind clues that would soon lead investigators straight to them. And while they may have believed that Pamela Smart's alibi would protect her, they underestimated the weight of their own guilt, their own mistakes. What they didn't realize was that the walls were already closing in. Every lie they told, every story they tried to spin would only tighten the net around them, and in just a matter of days the truth would begin to unravel. The crime had been committed. Greg Smart was gone. But the real story was just beginning. How long could Pamela, Billy, and the others keep their deadly secret? And when the truth finally came out, who would pay the ultimate price? The murder of Greg Smart shocked the quiet community of Derry, New Hampshire. In the early days of the investigation, police were left with more questions than answers. A burglary gone wrong seemed plausible at first glance, but something about the scene didn't sit right with detectives. The ransacked condo looked too staged, too deliberate, as if someone wanted it to tell a specific story. Then came the breakthrough, an anonymous tip. Someone close to Billy Flynn knew too much to stay silent. They told investigators to look into the teenager, and what they found cracked the case wide open. Under questioning, Billy crumbled. The weight of what he had done was too much for a 15-year-old to bear. He confessed to the murder, but his story didn't end there. Billy claimed he hadn't acted alone, that Pamela Smart had orchestrated the entire crime. According to him, she had manipulated him, convinced him that killing Greg was the only way they could be together. The confession sent shockwaves through the small town. A respected teacher, a newlywed accused of masterminding her husband's murder through her teenage lover. It was a story too sensational for the media to ignore, and soon, the case of Pamela Smart became a national obsession. As the investigation continued, the evidence began to mount. Phone records, witness testimonies, and the accounts of Billy's accomplices painted a damning picture of Pamela's involvement. By the time the trial began in 1991, the world was watching. The courtroom was a spectacle, one of the first trials to be broadcast live on television. Millions of viewers tuned in to see Pamela Smart, the woman at the center of it all. Dressed conservatively, she maintained a calm, composed demeanor, denying all allegations against her. The prosecution painted her as a calculating mastermind who had seduced a vulnerable teenager and manipulated him into doing her bidding. They argued that her affair with Billy Flynn wasn't about love, it was about control, about using him to remove the man she no longer wanted to be married to. Second, the defense, however, portrayed her as a victim of circumstance, insisting that Billy had acted on his own, driven by an obsessive infatuation. Pamela, they claimed, had no idea what he was planning. Public opinion was as divided as the courtroom itself. To some, Pamela's composure under cross-examination was proof of her guilt, a calculated attempt to appear innocent. To others, it was evidence of her resilience, her refusal to crumble under the weight of false accusations. As the trial unfolded, the nation became captivated by the details. Testimonies from Billy Flynn and his accomplices were especially damning, painting a picture of a woman who used her power and influence to bend others to her will. The media dubbed her a Black Widow, a femme fatale whose charm masked her deadly intentions. The jury deliberated for 9 hours before deliberating for 10 days on the first-degree murder, conspiracy to commit murder, and witness tampering. She was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Billy Flynn and his friends received reduced sentences in exchange for their testimony, but their lives, too, were forever changed. The case didn't end with the verdict. Pamela continued to claim her innocence, filing appeals and maintaining that she was framed. Meanwhile, the trial itself became a cultural moment, a reflection of a society fascinated by betrayal, power, and the darkest corners of human behavior. Pamela Smart's name was etched into history, not as a teacher or a newlywed, but as one of the most infamous figures of the 1990s. Yet, even decades later, questions linger. Was justice truly served, or was the story we were told shaped by media frenzy and public opinion? The story of Pamela Smart didn't end with the verdict. Decades later, the ripple effects of her case are still felt, not only in the lives of those directly involved, but also in the broader conversations it sparked about morality, power, and justice. Billy Flynn, the teenager at the heart of the crime, spent nearly 25 years in prison. He was paroled in 2015 at the age of 41. having expressed deep remorse for his actions. During his parole hearing, he described the lasting impact of Pamela Smart's influence on his life and the burden of guilt he would carry forever. Patrick Randall, who held Greg Smart down during the murder, and Vance Latham Jr., who supplied the murder weapon, also served significant prison time before being released. Both men have tried to move on, but the weight of their involvement in the crime remains a defining part of their stories. And then there's Pamela Smart. Now in her mid-50s, she remains incarcerated in a maximum security prison, serving a life sentence without the possibility of parole. For decades, she has maintained her innocence, insisting that while her relationship with Billy Flynn was a mistake, she never conspired to murder her husband. Her appeals for clemency have been denied time and again, leaving her with little hope of ever walking free. The case has become more than just a story of murder. It's a cautionary tale, a grim exploration of how power dynamics and unchecked emotions can lead to devastating consequences. Pamela's relationship with Billy wasn't just inappropriate, it was catastrophic, unraveling lives in ways no one could have imagined. But this case is also a reflection of its time. In the early 1990s, the 24-hour news cycle was still new, and Pamela Smart's trial became one of the first to be broadcast live on national television. The media's portrayal of her as a manipulative seductress undoubtedly shaped public perception and perhaps even the trial's outcome. To some, Pamela was a victim of sensationalized journalism and gendered stereotypes. To others, she was a cold-blooded mastermind who got exactly what she deserved. Decades later, the questions linger. Was Pamela Smart truly the puppet master behind the crime, a woman willing to sacrifice anything and anyone to escape her unhappy marriage? Or was she another victim, caught in a web of her own mistakes and the manipulations of others? The answers depend on who you ask. For the friends and family of Greg Smart, there is no doubt. For Billy Flynn, Patrick Randall, and Vance Latham, there may always be regret. And for Pamela Smart, there is only one truth. She is still waiting for the day when she might tell her story outside the walls of a prison. This case remains one of the most haunting examples of how love, power, and desperation can collide with deadly consequences. And while the story of Pamela Smart is one that continues to divide opinions, one thing is certain: no one involved will ever escape its shadow. If this story captivated you, be sure to hit that like button, share with others, and subscribe for more in-depth explorations of true crime cases that left a lasting mark on history. We'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. Do you believe Pamela Smart was truly guilty, or was she unjustly condemned by public perception? The discussion is far from over. The story of Pamela Smart didn't end with the verdict. Decades later, the ripple effects of her case are still felt, not only in the lives of those directly involved, but also in the broader conversations it sparked about morality, power, and justice. Billy Flynn, the teenager at the heart of the crime, spent nearly 25 years in prison. He was paroled in 2015 at the age of 41, having expressed deep remorse for his actions. During his parole hearing, he described the lasting impact of Pamela Smart's influence on his life and the burden of guilt he would carry forever. Patrick Randall, who held Greg Smart down during the murder, and Vance Latham Jr., who supplied the murder weapon, also served significant prison time before being released. Both men have tried to move on, but the weight of their involvement in the crime remains a defining part of their stories. And then there's Pamela Smart. Now in her mid-50s, she remains incarcerated in a maximum security prison, serving a life sentence without the possibility of parole. For decades, she has maintained her innocence, insisting that while her relationship with Billy Flynn was a mistake, she never conspired to murder her husband. Her appeals for clemency have been denied time and again, leaving her with little hope of ever walking free. The case has become more than just a story of murder. It's a cautionary tale, a grim exploration of how power dynamics and unchecked emotions can lead to devastating consequences. Pamela's relationship with Billy wasn't just inappropriate, it was catastrophic, unraveling lives in ways no one could have imagined. But this case is also a reflection of its time. In the early 1990s, the 24-hour news cycle was still new, and Pamela Smart's trial became one of the first to be broadcast live on national television. The media's portrayal of her as a manipulative seductress undoubtedly shaped public perception and perhaps even the trial's outcome. To some, Pamela was a victim of sensationalized journalism and gendered stereotypes. To others, she was a cold-blooded mastermind who got exactly what she deserved. Decades later, the questions linger. Was Pamela Smart truly the puppet master behind the crime, a woman willing to sacrifice anything and anyone to escape her unhappy marriage? Or was she another victim, caught in a web of her own mistakes and the manipulations of others? The answers depend on who you ask. For the friends and family of Greg Smart, there is no doubt. For Billy Flynn, Patrick Randall, and Vance Latimer, there may always be regret. And for Pamela Smart, there is only one truth. She is still waiting for the day when she might tell her story outside the walls of a prison. This case remains one of the most haunting examples of how love, power, and desperation can collide with deadly consequences. And while the story of Pamela Smart is one that continues to divide opinions, one thing is certain: no one involved will ever escape its shadow. If this story captivated you, be sure to hit that like button, share with others, and subscribe for more in-depth explorations of true crime cases that left a lasting mark on history. We'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. Do you believe Pamela Smart was truly guilty, or was she unjustly condemned by public perception? The discussion is far from over.